this episode of Who Gets the China, where we are working together to save our sanity while we care for our aging parents. And today I'm really excited about my guest. She's going to talk about a topic that I've been really interested in, and a lot of my listeners have been very interested in, and that is caring for somebody with dementia. Kay Adams is my guest today. She's a licensed clinical social worker. She's a speaker, a coach, an educator, and an author. She's also a certified dementia consultant and trainer, which we're going to learn all about today, and the founder of Compassion Works LLC, which provides individual dementia coaching, workshops, educational offerings, care partners, organizations, with a wide variety of topics related to dementia. So she's an expert, and we're really lucky to have her with us today. And like so many of my other guests, I love that she's just really passionate about supporting the people who are living with the condition, but also the families, the care partners, the caregivers, and everyone around them. So I'm really excited to help Kay break down some topics for us that might be uncomfortable, but that we need to be able to talk about. And she's going to help give us the language for doing so. So thanks for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Always, I love to find out from people how they found themselves in the current version of themselves doing the work that they're doing. So I'd love to hear your story and how you got to where you are today.
Trying to be a Cliff Notes version because I've been around a while.
Same.
I've been a medical social worker for 25 years. That was a whole different avenue for me to go professionally. And that started in the fall of 2001 when I took a job as a social worker for the Denver Hospice. And the team I worked on most of those 8.5 years took care of folks that lived in assisted living, nursing home, and memory care. So just by virtue of that, at least 40 to 60% of my caseload at any given time for 8 years were people that were living with some form of dementia or some stage of dementia. It may have been the reason they were on hospice. It was their terminal illness and they were at the end stage, or often it was in addition to something else with heart disease, lung disease, cancer. And maybe it was a mild or moderate version of dementia, and this other thing was the primary diagnosis. But aside from my maternal grandparents, I hadn't been around dementia ever before that job. And now I was 40 hours a week going into all of these different buildings that were full of people with cognitive decline and dementia. So it was quite the baptism by fire, to say the least. And it really lit a fire unto me and my passion for this, because over time, I really learned how difficult it was for the people going through that illness, and particularly how difficult it was for the families who loved them and lost them in chunks along the way. So I did that for 8.5 years. I thought I'd retire in hospice. I absolutely loved my job, but the universe plucked me out of there and took me over to Kaiser with no plans on moving jobs. And I ended up being a therapist for the first 3 years in Kaiser. And then I went to the Diagnostic Memory Clinic, which unfortunately no longer exists, but I worked there for 4.5 years. It was a specialty clinic within Kaiser where folks got referred for memory changes or concerns. So I worked with geriatric psychiatrists, geriatricians, nurse practitioners, pharmacists, another social worker. We were the clinic to refer to for diagnosis. So we were sort of in the bad news delivery business. And it was only 2 appointments. So the first appointment where the person came in for testing and I interviewed the family, and then the second appointment where the news was delivered.
Okay.
And so I was more at the earlier end of things there. But the families never let go of our cards. They kept calling us months and years later because there was nowhere else to go in Kaiser. And that broke my heart. And over time, I got to do a different job in Kaiser where I was the home-based dementia specialist in the palliative care department. So then I was doing home visits to people with dementia all over the city. I developed classes for caregivers. I was helping with advanced directives, all these things. It was pretty much a dream job, but there were some political changes afoot in Kaiser, and I was worried that my job would not exist too much longer. So I jumped ship in the fall of 2018, knowing nothing about business at the time. Got my website up in the spring of 2019, not knowing that a pandemic was a year ahead.
Right.
Or I may have hung out longer in Kaiser, but it was too late. I jumped ship. And so that's when I started Compassion Works. And like everybody else, when COVID hit, I had to totally regroup and pivot. Before that, I just met with people in Denver in person. And then when COVID hit, of course, no one was doing that. So I had to reinvent myself. And now it's actually a good thing because I work with folks currently in about 35 states and 2 countries for coaching, but I have over 20 countries represented in my monthly classes. So dementia,
Amazing,
yeah,
amazing. So
dementia
your
knows no
reach,
borders.
yeah, like it's so amazing you're able to reach people all over the world.
So even when I work with folks here in Denver, for the coaching aspect, I almost always do it on Zoom because there can be 5 family members that live in all different places on the call. And so that makes it really convenient and user friendly. So I do a lot of the individual coaching, family coaching, classes, teaching, and keynotes. And then I also wrote a book. So all of these things keep me very busy.
And
Yeah.
very useful to families that are struggling with something that's really hard to understand and comprehend. As a dementia coach, let's dive into that particular role that you play and just talking about the Zoom calls being on with 5 members of the family from all over. I mean, we all know this, right? Often when a parent has a condition, we're trying to come together as a family to provide the care. We might not all be in the same place. So as a dementia coach, what is your primary role?
I do some coaching with people with cognitive impairment or early stage dementia, but the majority of what I do is supporting the caregivers or care partners, the family
Okay.
members, whether they're a direct caregiver or indirect. They could live across the country,
Okay.
but still be involved and care about what's going on. And so I really try, the primary things I do is I always say with coaching, the person with dementia is in the middle of the wheel. And then there's all these spokes. And the spokes represent things like grief and loss and financial burden and stress and relationship changes and conflict and isolation and and misunderstanding about what's going on and you know not having a support system and those kinds of things. And so I any of those things I say are fair game, the spokes of the
Okay.
wheel. But what really is important is the person with dementia is in the middle. And I'm trying to help that family member or that family understand the disease, get educated about the disease, learn skills to help their person as their brain is changing and dying over time, and then try to build a community of support so they aren't alone in this. And then knowing I feel like I'm in the placement business, like placing people in nursing homes or assisted livings or memory care. I am
Hmm.
not, but that is the topic I talk about more than almost any other. How will I know it's time?
Because that's okay. That's what I was going to ask. Is that why? Because I think people are trying to decide, and I don't have a parent with significant dementia. We have some cognitive decline, but I have lots of friends who've had all broad range of experience. And it feels to me that it's really hard to decide when can we no longer be the caregiver ourselves, and maybe you have some in-home help or some additional support. When is it time to say my loved one needs full-time support that I'm not qualified or able to give? So is that one of the
Yeah,
hardest things, or
yes, it
what are some
is.
of the hardest things? Yeah.
Well, that is one of the hardest. And I have a workshop that I developed a while back and I'm going to be doing soon called When Will I Know It's Time? About placing a caregiver. And but my short answer to that is when the caregiver can't do it anymore.
Hmm.
And some people have a lot more tolerance for this than others.
Right.
And there's no right or wrong. But the other reality about all of that is it is really, really expensive to provide care in assisted living or memory care, sometimes 15, 20,000 a month. And a lot of people in this planet can't do that. They don't have
Right.
the money to do that, even for a short time. And so they have to be more creative on ways to do that. But I think that's one of the hardest things because I've worked with caregivers that cared for folks with, heart disease, lung disease, cancer, ALS, all kinds of diseases. But for me, the hardest of all of those are the dementias. Because if someone's brain is still intact, like when my dad was dying of cancer, it was hard, it was brutal, but he still knew us all. He was still dad and all of those things. The relationship was still intact. But when you lose someone to dementia, it changes so much of that. And I think one of the hardest things is the relationship changes that come with it that most people are not prepared for. They don't even think that that's part and parcel of what might happen.
What are the relationship changes that maybe we should be on the lookout for?
Most people will think about a dementia that it's just a memory problem. And that's
Okay.
why the class that I teach almost every month is called More Than Memory, Understanding Brain Changes and Dementia from the Inside Out. Because I always say to folks, if you're only ready for a memory problem, you are not ready.
Okay.
Right now, we have over 120 different kinds of dementias that we can identify. None of them have a cure. So all of them essentially are still considered terminal illnesses at this time. And so they will progress and they will get worse over time unless somebody who wins the lottery can figure out the key to stopping this. And so far, that hasn't happened. And we've known about Alzheimer's since 1906.
Oh my goodness,
So,
really?
yeah,
Okay.
we didn't do a lot with it for a long time because it was an old person's problem, and that wasn't where research dollars went.
In my mind, I do think of dementia as a memory problem.
And you are right with the masses on
Okay.
that one.
Okay, good. You're going to make us
So
smarter today.
maybe. So you get dementia one of two ways. It's not a normal part of aging.
Okay.
So it's either by an injury to the brain, like you fall off a ladder and get a brain bleed, or maybe you were a football player or a boxer or a soccer player with lots of heading for years in your youth, and you had a lot of jolts to your brain from the sports, or you had a serious car accident and your head went through the windshield, or things like that, that later that injury to the brain can develop a dementia.
Okay.
And the other way is it is a disease in the brain. So like Alzheimer's disease is a disease in the brain, but it's also caused by other things like strokes. Vascular dementia is caused usually by blood flow that's interrupted to the brain. There's Lewy body dementia, there's frontotemporal dementia, alcohol related dementias. There's all kinds of different things, but none of them act exactly the same. But most of them do involve some memory loss. But really, what it is the brain is dying. Different parts of the brain are dying over time. So it depends on what part of the brain is impacted, will you see changes? So if it's hitting the part like the hippocampus part of the brain where our short-term memory lives, then you might see your loved one constantly asking you the same question over and over, telling you the same stories over and over in a short period of time because they can't hang on to that information because that part of the brain helps us to do that and it's damaged.
Okay.
Right? So that's one thing. But we think about our brain as our control center. So our brain affects our personality, affects our mood, affects our behavior, our ability to sequence tasks. It's our executive functioning skills, planning and processing, reasoning, empathy, all of those things. So depending on what part of the brain the dementia is attacking, we can see changes in all of those areas, including ability to be walk, talk, be mobile, be continent. Everything is on the table when there's a dementia.
Things like personality shifts, like maybe someone you love is starting to seem crankier. I mean, I know we sort of joke about that grumpy old men movie, right? But I mean, a mood change, personality change, somebody just not seeming like they're themselves anymore. Those might be signs of dementia, even though they might be able to remember all the things. It's more a different aspect of the brain that's being impacted.
So, for instance, in frontotemporal dementia, it affects the frontal lobes of the brain, and there's two temporal lobes on each side. And it depends on which side, but if it hits a certain part of the temporal lobe, that's where our logic, reasoning, personality, those kinds of things live. So, and that's the last part of the brain to develop. So, an example I give a lot to people is my son is 16 now, but when he was little and we were in a park together, a very obese woman walked by and out he yells, top of his lungs, "Mama, look at the fat lady." Right. And I'm mortified. Okay. But
Right.
he's like
We've all
four,
been there.
three.
Right. We've
Yeah.
all had
Right.
that. Yes.
His frontotemporal lobe was not developed, right? And he didn't know better. At 16, if he did that, he'd be in big trouble, right? He knows better now. But it's the last part to develop, that part that the right or the wrong and the social reasoning, and it's our social governor. You might think something, but you don't just spit it out of your mouth and
Hmm.
those kinds. So when that lobe gets affected, people can really change from, being a really kind, considerate, respectful kind of person to suddenly being on porn sites, to sexually harassing their coworkers, to calling people all kinds of names, just uninhibited. So some people can be way more of themselves, like on steroids with the dementia, and some people can change a lot. So my mom died a year ago, December, and she had dementia the last 5 years of her life in the form more of paranoia and delusions, not Alzheimer's. Her memory was really intact for a very, very, very long time. But I had a hard time convincing my family members of this, even though they lived a mile from her and I live 500 miles away. But
Uh-huh.
I talked to her 5 to 7 days a week because she was a depression era person, and she never let anybody take advantage of her financially in any way because they grew up so poor.
Yeah.
So my whole life, like you couldn't get out of the grocery line without her going through every single item on the receipt. And if they overcharged her a nickel, she's going to get the manager. And she was still like that into her 90s. And I was like, oh my God, mom, what is it now?
I
That kind
know.
of stuff. But she was doing that with the companies now and with her bank and calling the FBI
Mm,
and calling the police and doing all kinds of strange things. And I kept saying to my family, yeah, I know she's always been very, very hyper vigilant that
mm-hmm.
protect her assets and no one was going to take advantage of her. But could we all agree that calling the FBI over her
It's
cable
not.
bill is not normal? And my family
Uh,
just wrote me off like you're a little overzealous about your job. And it really took it escalating to a high level before they really said, oh God, maybe Kay knows something.
yeah, maybe this
It took a
expert in
long
our
time.
family is right. Well,
It took
because
a long
I'm
time.
thinking about my own parents, and for instance, the way that I came to this journey was a lot about the struggle to get rid of the sentimental items that we all have packed in our dining rooms and kitchens and closets and buffets. And one thing that I notice is that it's harder for my mom now to get rid of things that still don't have sentimental value. Like she'll save a lot of things because she thinks she needs them. Now, yes, my mom also had depression era influences and so is frugal, as many of our parents are. But I had a funny conversation with college roommates when I saw them recently who saves twist ties or the little plastic
Oh
things
yeah,
that come on your
yes,
bread, right? And so
yes.
I mean, my mom has a lot of these twist ties. Like, how many of twist ties could two people living together really have a need for? And so we had a good laugh about who saves, who throws, which ones do you save, who keeps them. But what I'm hearing from you too now is like behaviors that might have been normal, but they eventually get exaggerated can be part of cognitive decline that
Either
might
way,
be
my mom
undiagnosed.
saved everything. She saved plastic bags. She saved twist ties. She must have had 500 twist ties in a
Yeah.
baggie after she died. But that wasn't because of her dementia. She's done that forever.
Okay.
Scraps of paper,
Oh,
because you
yeah.
could reuse it.
Same.
Like,
Yes.
tiny, tiny bits of soap,
Oh my
tiny, you
gosh.
can barely pick it up.
Yes,
Because
yes.
when you had nothing, you
Right.
save every scrap. So, but the other thing is that people like one of my coaching clients last week was talking about her mom, and her mom now has dementia. She just moved into memory care, and her mom was not a very lovable, likable person when this woman was growing up. She
Hmm.
wasn't demonstrative. She didn't ever say, I love you. She was real critical, judgmental. So they had a pretty strained relationship most of their life. Now,
Hmm.
mom is in her 70s, early 80s, and she has dementia. And suddenly, for the first time, the daughter is saying, my mom is so sweet. She is so funny. She is so nice to be around. She's so gracious. She thanks me for things. She tells me she loves me. She tells me I'm beautiful. And she said, this is just hell on earth because I'm finally getting the mom I wanted and I'm losing her to this disease. So people can do a 180 on their
Hmm.
personality also in a positive direction or not a positive direction. So I'm always cautioning people, if you know one person living with dementia, you know one person living with dementia. Just because you've known five others, you think this person's going to act or do, behave the same, but we can't make that assumption at all because no two people go through their journey the same.
As a caregiver, then, knowing that there's not a clear roadmap,
No.
we need to be prepared for many eventualities. So, how can we be better prepared to know what we should be looking for, what we should be doing, how we should be, responding to our loved one that's suffering with dementia?
Well, before we even get to dementia, one thing I'm always asking people about is, do you have your advance directives done? Have
Okay.
you named, or do your parents or whoever in your life, do they have a living will? Do they have somebody appointed as their medical decision maker? Do they have someone appointed as their financial decision maker? All of those kinds of things, because if someone does develop cognitive impairment or dementia, that paperwork is essentially important. And even if
Okay.
they don't develop dementia, But when they do, there's a window where they aren't going to be able to make competent decisions anymore. When they aren't going to be able to weigh out complex medical decisions, even simple decisions. Do I wear red or do I wear blue today? At some point.
Right.
So it's really important with our aging population that those folks and people don't want to do it. We're a death of, denying culture. We don't want to deal with all that. But it is really, really important. And as a medical social worker, I can tell you that if someone ends up in the hospital, the first thing they're going for is who's the contact person, who's the
Okay.
medical decision maker. If they've been in a car accident or they're in a coma or they're delusional because of running a fever or whatever might be happening, who is the go-to to make decisions? And that stuff has to be documented. So those forms are really important. And past them just being documented, people need to have conversations about it. Because what I really learned in hospice and then ever since was that if that stuff isn't done, if there's nothing written down and you've never had a talk with your loved one about it, and then let's say they have a major stroke, all right, and now they went from being fully functioning to bedbound and unable to talk, unable to make sense of their environment, don't know who they are, don't know who anybody else is. And now they're starting to have problems swallowing. Then the family's left to, do we put in a feeding tube? Do we do artificial nutrition, hydration? We never talked about it. Oh my God, I don't know what to do. And so people tend to do everything when they don't know what
Right.
to do, when they've
Right.
had no direction, when maybe that person never wanted that. They would not have wanted all the bells and whistles and that. So it's really important to document the wishes as things
Mm-hmm.
change. It's supposed to be a living document. You want to change those things as your health changes and have those conversations. So, but with dementia, people lose the ability to advocate for themselves, to tell you
Right.
what they want you to do or don't want you to do. And I did a lot of that facilitation of those conversations in Kaiser for years. And I try to coach families on how to do that. It's hard because people don't want to talk about it,
Right.
but it's really important because then it guides the decisions for whoever in the family is having to make those choices for them.
I think
And
I was going to ask you about this. So there's a living will, and there's advanced directives, and there's financial power of attorney. And we've recently done a lot of that, redone that with my parents because it had been the same for, like you said, since they were 50. But what about the sort of finer details about things like, I don't want to be on a feeding tube or I don't want to be on a ventilator? I don't know that those specifics are documented. Are
so
they
living
typically
wills,
or
yeah,
okay.
with living wills, they should be
Okay.
documented. Some people, it's way more specific than others.
Okay.
And there's even things like, oh, what's it called? 5 wishes that you can download off the
Yep.
internet, things like that you can fill out. And do you want to be buried or cremated? What are things that you want in surrounding you as you're dying and what's important
Right.
and what are your values? And there's different kinds of tools out there to help with those conversations. But it's really important to document that and then to talk about it. My mom, for instance, she she survived a cardiac arrest in 1993,
Oh, okay.
right before her 64th birthday. In the middle of an aerobics class, she collapsed. So CPR saved her. They brought her back to life, and she remarkably did not have any cognitive changes from that, which most people do.
Hmm.
And then she had a defibrillator implanted after that, and it saved her 3 times. When she was over exercising, it shocked her heart into stars.
I mean, I love
Again,
it. I wish I had met your mom. She sounds like a
oh yeah,
firecracker.
she was a firecracker. And anyway, but she had that defibrillator taken out like 20 years ago, 20 years before she died, because she said it might save me when don't want to be saved. And she told my brother and I, because my dad died back in 2002, she told my brother and I, her favorite thing to do is play cards, especially bridge. She was a bridge shark. And she loved super social, loved being around people, lived alone and independent living, but always with other people all the time. And she said her biggest fear was to have a stroke and survive and not
Hmm.
be able to communicate or play online bridge or do any of those things. And that was her line in the sand. And so she said to my brother and I, if I ever get to that point, don't you dare do anything that's going to prolong my life, because it will not be quality and you'll only be doing it for selfish reasons, just to keep me here. So she was very clear, which was great for us.
Right.
But
It's
other
great for
families will
you.
just go like,
Yeah.
well, if you need to pull the plug, pull the plug. Well, that is that is such a general term that no one even knows what that means.
Right, that's what I'm saying. You don't know what does that really mean? I mean, I want specifics. I want to know, and I think what your mom said, I love that. It's like this is the quality of life that I want. If I can't have that, don't prolong it for me.
Absolutely.
And that's a gift that she gave you
Yeah.
that.
Oh, and absolutely. Hands down. It made it so much easier for us at the end of her life to know what to do.
How do we know when it might be time to have a cognitive assessment? I have two different experiences with the two different parents. One was been really willing to do that when a doctor recommended it. The other one don't want to talk about that at all. Like, as the future caregiver or potential caregiver, I think I am inclined to look for signs of memory. Like, my mom started to have some mild memory challenges, not dramatic, but enough that it was like, well, let's just have an assessment. But what I'm hearing you say today are there are other clues we should be looking for that are not just memory. Give me some guideposts or some suggestions about if you're starting to notice, and maybe it is just as much as a personality change, but what's advice about when to take the next step and go to get a cognitive assessment?
So, of all the different kinds of dementias out there, Alzheimer's is the most common one we hear about most often. And most people would know that memory issues come with that, but also problem solving, being able to balance a checkbook, being able to figure out a recipe. Things like that might be signs. Difficulty completing familiar tasks. Maybe they've lived in the same house 30 years and they got lost 6 blocks from home and didn't know what to do. Another example might be getting confused about dates, times, people. Who is this person in relation to me? Forgetting important events, birthdays, anniversaries, that kind of thing. It might be a spatial awareness, knocking the rearview mirror off the car driving in. Peripheral vision changes in word finding, can't come up with the right word, talking around the word, can't remember names, nouns, that kind of thing is really common. A big one is misplacing things and retracing steps,
Mhm.
constantly losing their phone, constantly losing the keys, the wallet, the purse,
But
the
more
credit
than
card.
me, I mean, I feel like I'm
Yes,
constantly looking for my keys.
yes, yes. But it's like you can spend a lot of hours a day retracing and can't find it.
Okay.
The other thing is like decreased or poor judgment. Somebody who's on porn now when they never used to be, falling for financial exploitation, which is $1 billion business. That's a big one for folks. Withdrawing from people, like kind of going into their own cocoon and not wanting to interact with other people. And then if we see some mood and personality changes that are, most of our personalities are pretty set by our early 20s, but of course we all change and evolve over time. But I always give myself an example. I'm a huge extrovert, and if I suddenly don't want to be around people, I don't want to go anywhere, I don't want to talk to anybody, I don't want to see anybody, I'm really avoidant, people should be worried because that's
Hmm.
not my baseline, or people that like love being around their grandkids. They love being nothing else but being around their family and suddenly can't stand being around. They just go to their own room and withdraw and that kind of stuff. So when you start seeing these red flags, and I always say in my classes, like, so there's normal aging, there's different things as we age, there's certain things that, all of us start doing. But that middle ground is more like the mild cognitive impairment, or MCI,
Hmm.
where I call it more like a nuisance. Like you're looking for the keys, you're looking for the phone, maybe you're needing more stick 'em notes to remember things, or you're more relying on a calendar or whatever, but you're still managing. It's a nuisance, but it's not interfering with your day-to-day functioning. Where it tips from like that MCI into dementia is when whatever the person is struggling with is now impacting their day-to-day abilities a little bit or a whole lot.
Okay.
So they're getting lost in familiar places, they're forgetting appointments, they're forgetting their meds. So when you start seeing those red flags, that's a good time to try to get an assessment. But as medical providers, I think when people hit their 60s, they should be doing those annually, if not more often. And we're an avoidant culture. I worked in Kaiser 8.5 years, and I was in people's medical records every day. And you could put in like a keyword to see how many times it came up in somebody's chart. And you could put
Hmm.
in cognitive impairment or dementia, might have come up 40 times in somebody's chart, and it's never listed on their problem list as a diagnosis. But maybe they're on Aricept, a memory med, which makes no sense. It's like,
Crazy.
would you put somebody on a cancer med without putting cancer on their diagnosis? No, but we do it for
No.
memory stuff all the time. So I just say the bottom line is encourage a baseline. It's good to get a baseline cognitive assessment as often as possible. And if there's
Okay.
trouble in there, to try to get more detailed evaluations if you have access or if the person would go. My mom
Right.
never thought anything was wrong with her, which at least 50% of people think that. They don't see it in themselves at all. And so they'll never go get a test. But there are other
Right.
ways around it that I coach people to try to get that information to the doctor.
Because you're right. It's like I can see that. I mean, again, probably we're all like that, right? If I'm the one having the cognitive decline, I know some people are aware. I have a friend, her mom knew, and she was open about it and wanted to see the neurologist and learn more. And she's been coping with that, but she's aware of it. But I feel like it's more common, at least among the people that I talk to, where you have a parent, you're looking at them and saying, this doesn't seem quite like you. This seems a little bit concerning. What do you think about getting a cognitive assessment? And they either don't want it, or even with my dad, I've had him say, well, my doctor gave me that quiz in the office and he says I'm fine.
I spend
And
a lot of my coaching calls trying to talk with individual family members about what is the best way to go about this, that you
okay,
can't go in a straight line from point A to point B and get it done.
okay.
What are
So
ways
what do
to
I
get
need to
information
do?
to the doctor?
What should I do?
Well, some of those things is, so if you can, besides that, when we talked about living wills and advance directives,
Yes.
getting on a person's HIPAA, their medical information, so that if you
Yep.
get access to your loved ones, and that's usually an internal form in whatever their medical care is, so that you have access to their medical chart or the medical record, because it's a one-way street otherwise. You can tell them stuff, but they can't tell you. And
Right.
so you want to be able to have access to that. And so is there actually something in your dad's chart that says that he had that quiz, and what's the score? And
Right.
maybe the score wasn't good, but the doctor said, oh, you're fine, because that happens all the time too.
Well,
And
that's
so,
what I wonder about. So it is interesting that you're saying that because I think we do have all the HIPAA forms, but on my mom's, she's fine and totally open. I can see all the things. But with my dad, I don't think we've said, I want access to this particular electronic health record, right? Because of
uh-huh.
course, all the doctors are different. They all have different electronic health record. But you're right. So we don't know exactly what the score was and what was said could be two different things.
Yes. And so and what I coach people a lot to do is, like, if you have access, if it's an electronic medical chart and the loved one doesn't read it, because if they read it, they might get pissed off. But if they don't happen to read it, then you could put in there, Dr. So-and-so, my dad's coming into an appointment next month, in bullet points, easy to read, easy to scan. Here's what I've noticed: changes in cognition, personality changes, mood changes, da 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 da. And I'm really concerned that there's a developing dementia. I'd really like it if you could do this. And then a caveat is, say, please don't share this information with my dad, because what happens is providers throw the family member under the bus. Oh,
Right.
your doctor says, I hear you're having some memory problems. And then you become the enemy. And so
Right.
it shouldn't be that way, but it happens a lot. So
Okay.
depending on if they have access to the chart or they don't, I try to give people in my coaching calls, fodder for how to go forward with those kinds of things.
One step at a time, trying to slowly build confidence and trust also is something that has been important for us of we're not trying to just get in your business for no reason at all. But here's where I can add some value. Let me go to the eye doctor with you. That's not threatening. That's not a big deal. Okay, that went well. That was not awkward, embarrassing. You weren't overbearing. So that's a gateway to the next opportunity. So trying to take baby steps, but there
Yes,
comes a point where all of a sudden it's not a baby step anymore. It's a big step.
it's a big
Um,
step.
mhm.
And that's why you want to get that assessment, because there are some things that can look like dementia that aren't. Like clinical depression that's untreated
Mhm.
can look like dementia. Significant hearing loss or vision loss, where people aren't taking in the data from their environment, therefore it's not registering, they're not remembering it, can look like it. untreated Lyme's disease can look like dementia. So and that's another argument you can say for them is like, well, we want to make sure it's not something we can improve and do something
Right.
about, easily. With my mom, I was, like I said, 500 miles away, and she was all paranoid about medical records and all, even with us. And I had to go the back door approach to get on her HIPAA. My brother went to the same doctor. I had him get the form while he was in the office. And then I had a conversation with my mom saying, because she hasn't had the cardiac history. And I'm like, Mom, I'd be there in a second if something happened. But if you had a stroke today and you end up in the hospital in Nebraska and I call, even if I know where you are, they're not going to tell me you're there. And I'm going to want to get in that car. And
Right.
she never wanted to create stress for her kids. And so that's how I sold it. And then when I sold it to her, then my brother was seeing her the next day. I said, go there with the form, strike while the iron is hot,
Right.
and that kind of stuff before she changed her mind again.
Uh,
And then it was never in her file. But my brother, I'm like, next time you go onto your PCP, who was the same one as my mom's PCP, I said, make sure you take this list of things that we're seeing concerns in mom, that gets scanned into her chart because she looks like $1,000,000 every time she goes to see her doctor twice a year.
and people have
But
talked about that. That's like a skill that we acquire, right? We can be really on and sharp and with it for that 15 or 20 minutes that
yes,
our primary care doctor is talking to us. But then the reality sets back in. So it's like not a performance, but somehow our
almost,
body's able to prop us up for that critical window. And so the
especially
doctor
those
isn't
older
seeing it.
generations, like
Yeah.
they dress up for the doctor,
Yeah. Yeah.
all of
Yeah.
that.
No.
Yeah.
Or, and also I feel like for us, maybe this is just a generational thing, but a little more, it's like I'm ready to just put it all on the table. Like I'm paying for this visit. I've waited for this visit. I see you as not somebody on a pedestal, but you're somebody who's here to help me. Whereas I feel like from our parents' generation, there's a little bit more like fear and awe, and the doctor is like on a different level than you are.
God, yes.
Yeah, a god. Okay. Well, yes, or that, or that. So let's talk for a minute about if you are caring for somebody with dementia, it's diagnosed, it's dementia, it's one of the many kinds. What are some of the most important things you can do for that loved one?
That relationship is really important. So doing whatever you can do to keep the best relationship possible. And with that means you need to get educated about
Okay.
what's happening for them so that you understand the brain changes they're going through. Because what I think is just deeply sad, and I see it all the time, is I saw this a lot when I was in the memory clinic with Kaiser. So I would interview the family while the other person's across the hall getting cognitive testing done. And I'd ask questions and they'd be like, well, my husband used to be such a sweet person, but he's turned into such a jerk now. He just says these really rude things to me, and we're on the brink of divorce. And, he got written up on his job because he was talking crap to the female employees there, and that was never him before, and I don't know what's going on with him, and he says he's not drinking, but something's happening, and they're thinking it's all these character defects. They're thinking that their person has turned into this monster, when
Mm-hmm.
really what they were seeing is symptoms of the dementia in front of them, but they couldn't identify that. And so a lot of people I've met have long since been divorced before it was ever diagnosed, or they lost their job, or all kinds of bad stuff happened. And we with the normal brains assume, we don't, our first thought isn't, oh, I bet it's a memory change. Oh, I bet they have a developing dementia. No, we just think they're being a jerk, they're being lazy, they're being manipulative, or whatever, because we're offended in some way, right? Or we're angry in some way. So really just getting that education and getting the support, because I say this all the time. I have worked with all kinds of caregivers in every kind of imaginable illness throughout my career. And I have not ever met a more isolated group of people than people who are caring for someone with dementia. Their worlds become so small, they can't even take a 5-minute shower for fear that person's going to fall, start the stove on fire, run out the door, whatever it is. And um, and so they need to start. You can't just focus on the person with dementia. You have to focus on you as the caregiver. How can you build a team? How can
Okay.
you build a foundation of support for yourself? Because this is a marathon and not a sprint when it comes to this illness. It's long and it's super expensive. And so if you get other people early on ground level to kind of help you in different ways, it sure makes it a lot easier as you look, 5 years up the road and that kind of stuff. So if you can try to really cherish that relationship, deal with the grief that comes with it along the way, because there's all these losses, micro
Mm-hmm.
losses for years. And so you don't want to process those losses so much with the person with them, but with someone else, a safe person, because it's hard because you just lose them along the way. But we don't recognize loss well when somebody dies, let alone when someone's still alive, right?
Right,
And
right,
so that person gets very invisible and feels really invalidated and misunderstood a lot. So I think it's important that it's a two-way street. It's both the person living with the illness is equally as important as the person supporting them. Because in most cases, it's all the eggs in one basket. It's the Kirstens of the world only that it's the spouse or the adult child, mostly the daughters in this
mm-hmm.
situation. And even if there's 5 kids in the family, it's one primarily,
Yep,
usually, that's taken the brunt of it. And so it's just not sustainable to do it all yourself. People try, but there's so much resentment and there's so many health problems and mental health problems that come with trying to do it all by yourself. So it's really important to have that buy-in from the beginning. I may need to get some help, because the other
right.
thing I come across is someone who gets diagnosed and they're like, they make their spouse or their kids or whoever promise, you're not going to tell anybody. I don't want anybody to know. I don't want anybody to treat me differently. And it's
Mm-hmm.
valid. I understand the fear where that emanates from. But my argument with is, you need support over here. You
Right,
need support because you're dealing with you're doing double duty for both brains. You're thinking for yourself and for them, and you're doing all this stuff. And so you might have to tell them a therapeutic lie and not and be not quite honest that you are confiding in a few people, or you've hired a dementia coach, or you've done whatever, because that is a method of self-care for the long term. And if you try to keep it all a secret, what I found is people will make up their own reasons why someone is repeating themselves, or why their personality is
mm.
different. And it's never going to be good. It's going to be they're doing drugs, they're doing alcohol, they're God knows what, they're schizophrenic. They'll make up all kinds of stuff that isn't on par at all. Uh, and so, and if we give them the actual real answers, they could step up and help. But if they're making it all up, it can make this situation spiral and become worse. So I always say, you might have made that promise once, you're not going to tell anybody, but you didn't understand how deeply this was going to impact your sanity.
Right,
And
right.
if you exited the scene right now, this person would no longer be able to be at home.
No.
And so you have to treat yourself as someone who's super important to this equation.
Hmm. I think it is hard because we do make promises, even to ourselves, that say, I'm going to take care of this person. I know they want to stay at home. I think many kids, myself included, have heard their parents say, "Don't send me to the home. Whatever
Oh yeah.
happens, don't send me to the home. I don't want to go to the home." And you feel like you make a promise to your parent, you make a promise to yourself that I'm going to continue to do this, but then at some point it becomes more than what any one human can be expected to do. And then as the daughter or as a son, you feel a lot of guilt that you can't fulfill that promise.
Number one emotion I talk about in coaching calls, guilt. Number
Mm.
one.
What have you learned about yourself from caring for your mom with dementia? Or what do you find that other caregivers learn about themselves when they're caring for someone?
What I use I'm really transparent in my classes and in my coaching and my speaking engagements. I use myself as an example a lot. It's a little easier now that my mom died, because she can't possibly overhear me talking about her. But one thing is, I can say these things because I know all this. But when I would go back, there's a great example. A couple of years ago, I took my son back a couple of years ago to visit my mom, and I spent a lot of time in the car saying, Grandma's brain is different than a year ago when you saw her last. Grandma's brain is different. Her personality is different. All this stuff is different. And so I'm preparing him, but we get to town, we check into an Airbnb, and then 20 minutes later, we go to my mom's condo. And within 15 minutes, I was getting torqued. She was doing stuff that was ridiculous, and it didn't make any sense. And my son is standing behind my mom, so she can't see him, going like this to me, like, Mom, stop. What are you doing? And I felt so, even though I know all this stuff, I fall into the exact same traps because that mother-daughter relationship at that point had went back 63 years. And
Right,
so,
right.
or 62 or whatever it was. And so we have a well-worn pattern. We have a well-worn dance, right? And so even though I know this stuff intellectually, it's so different when you're in a relationship. And so that's what people learn a lot is that they can't help it. They can't help but get angry sometimes and to lose it sometimes and to assume the worst sometimes because we're actually swimming upstream against our normal brains as caring for someone with a dementia. It's really, really hard. And so they learn that, and they learn that they're also more capable than they ever knew about doing hard things in a way they never thought. And I think people also discover the depths and the expanse of their love that they never knew would go that far for one person. I used to say this a lot in hospice. I used to say, I'm glad I don't have a crystal ball, glad I can't see what's ahead. Because, for instance, in my last year and a half, I moved twice, got divorced, and lost my mom in 6 months.
Hmm.
And if anyone would have told me that that was all coming, I wouldn't be here on this podcast with you because I'd be somewhere else, right?
Right,
And
right.
so it's good that we don't all know what's coming, and it's more in bite-sized pieces. But I am a really strong advocate that I always say to people right out of the gate, if you want to be an ostrich, I'm not the one you want to work with because I'm very straightforward. I don't think dancing around the topic or acting like it's not going to happen. It's not a matter of if, it's when, because I feel like that's kinder and more compassionate than let's pretend it's not going to happen
Hmm.
and then be
Hmm.
sideswiped by it all and so stressed. And so I try to, live in that zone, like not to overwhelm people, but also like things are going to change and let's, as we go, let's prepare for that. So we're not completely overwhelmed when it
It's like
happens.
starting a new job, right? It's like anything in life.
Oh,
When we had babies, we had kids, we were reading books, we were learning, we were trying to arm ourselves with as much information as we could so that we could do our best to make smart choices. And I think it's the same for this, but I don't think that we all really understand what's going to be expected of us fully. You
no.
just don't know.
Right. And I think the other thing, when you're not everybody else in your life you can use logic and reasoning with, and you relate to the term, and then there you have this one exception. And so it is really hard to to get out of that groove that we have related to our loved one in and everybody else in our life, and then to change gears constantly.
Yeah.
It's really
Yeah.
hard. And so
That's
I
such a
think
good point.
learning that we can be patient with ourselves, learning that we can practice self-compassion, that kind of stuff is really, really important. Learning that we need to take care of ourselves. I know that's so overused, but people go under. I mean, we know there's a really high incidence of depression, substance abuse, anxiety, and suicidal
Hmm.
ideation among caregivers. And two fun risk factors are for dementia are one is especially for Alzheimer's because it's 2/3 women to 1/3 men. So just being female and age and being a caregiver for someone with dementia increases your risk of getting dementia.
Oh, great.
So great, right? And so if you don't take care of yourself along the way,
Right, right.
you're just putting yourself more in a jackpot that genetically you're a little higher end just because it's in your family, but that doesn't mean you're absolutely going to get it. So I'm always saying, it's not a joke. It's not a luxury, this self-care piece. It's like
Hmm.
really got to do it
Right.
if you're going to try to keep yourself as healthy as possible in the long run.
Yeah, don't be a martyr, which I
No,
think a lot of us, myself included, can be guilty of, where you're trying to just constantly show, I can handle it, I can handle it, I can handle hard things. And it doesn't mean you can't handle it, but you need to avail yourself of support along the way. So,
I always, asking for help, strength, not a weakness.
okay,
And I'm always
absolutely.
saying, let's start building that muscle now. Let's start practicing and flexing it so it doesn't feel so hard to do.
One thing that I do love to ask people is, have you personally, or have you been working with a family who has a who gets the China moment or lesson about either how to embrace the sentimental items that you have with your family, or how decluttering or going through them has taught you something about yourself or the family history?
I have a few different thoughts. One is when someone has a dementia, the less clutter around them, the better.
Mm,
the better their brain functions, the better. And a lot of times when people develop dementia, even if they've never had a tendency to collect or hoard, they develop that in a lot of people. And the more stuff we have around us, it's a safety concern. The more crap everywhere is just a safety concern. And the more we have around us that we have to hunt through every time we can't find our keys and our wallet, it just makes it worse. So simplifying the environment is a godsend for someone with dementia. So
Okay.
it's a positive.
So there's a
So that
motivation to do it because it improves their quality of life.
yes. The other thing I want to say is that, people do have sentimental things or things that make them feel good. And so the other part about it is if someone does have to move from their home to an assisted living or independent living or to memory care, it's also really important if there was things that were really sentimental to them, like if they had a favorite chair they always loved to sit in, or they had a favorite family photograph that always hung on the wall in their office, or
Hmm.
things like that that were always meaningful, or they would look at that, or they had history, they had a heart connection with that piece of thing. That's important to move with them. That's important. Like that doesn't stay in the house, that goes with them. Those kinds of things, so that it feels, even though it's not home, no one's going to say it's home,
Hmm.
but it feels more familiar. It feels safer, feels more comfortable.
As the daughter of the person who you're caretaking for, who might have attachment to a lot of sentimental items, in coaching your families, have you seen that particular items might give the kids comfort? Or, is there a way or sentimental items that we keep as the child to still feel that connection to our loved one who is, like you said, escaping us slowly?
Yeah, and every family's different when it comes to this. Your mom might be similar to my mom. My mom was a pragmatist, because of the depression. And so after my dad died, she gave almost everything he owned away immediately. And people thought she'd lost her mind. Okay.
Hmm.
But she let my brother and I pick one item of clothing hanging in the closet of my dad's that we could keep. That was it, one item. And what she ended up doing with that item is, I have it sitting above me, is I picked the item of a coat I'd given him, a fleece coat that he wore all the time. He loved it. And she had both of these things made into a teddy bear for my brother and I out of that item of clothing. So instead of having 10 of his coats, I have a teddy bear made out of the coat I gave him. And so that's a simple example that was really meaningful. Um, and then when my mom had it, was very spiritual, and lavender was her prayer color. When she saw lavender, all these wonderful things happen. While she was in hospice the last 2 months, I got her a couple pillows that were infused with lavender scent. And she had them, she mainly lived in a recliner except the last 7 days. And so she had these pillows around her all the time. So after she died, I said to my brother, would you mind if I took those pillows back? And so they're the throw pillows on my bed. And every morning when I make my bed, I hug those pillows. I inhale that scent of lavender that I can still smell, and just tell her how much I miss her. So it doesn't have to be lots of stuff, but it has to be stuff that means something to you and that reminds you of that person. What I see happen too often is that families fight over a bunch of stuff. If it's the china or it's the table or it's this or that, and that makes me sad because it doesn't have to be that way. It can be just like
Hmm.
could just be a couple items that when you see that, I have a rock here. It's a purple rock. So lavender, it's lavender. And I got it
Yep.
from like a store in Nebraska when my mom was dying, because she got kind of nervous sometimes, or she just liked to hold things, and if there wasn't a hand to hold. So I brought this to her. And so she
Oh.
would have it in her hand a lot, and it warms up when you hold it. And so I have it here on my desk to remind me of her. And so I think it can be just like, you want to have something that when you look at that or you touch that object, brings you right back to that heart connection. But it doesn't have to be a garage full of stuff. Again, it can be simply simplify. Simple is
Right,
better, less is
right.
more.
Yeah. And if you're doing that along the way, then when you get to the end, it's not so overwhelming. Is there anything that I didn't ask that you want to tell our listeners today?
None of us get to know what's coming and what illness we might be called upon to care for. I think it's just important for people to know that there's resources out there. There are people like me out there, or calling a friend or a pastor or a priest or whoever, just that don't go through it alone. I haven't met anybody in 25 years who have done this journey alone till the end. Unless someone's had a fall or another illness that's interrupted that trajectory of the dementia or something else. I've not seen it. I've just not seen it happen. It really does take a village. It takes a mindset shift. It takes build the strength of asking for help and accepting it shift. And it can actually be a gift how it changes us and how it grows us, especially grief. I think the two most powerful emotions that people have are love and grief. And the more we love, the more we grieve. So getting support through this journey from start to finish from people who understand the journey. I always say you have to find your tribe who aren't caring for someone with cancer and trying to tell you what to do with someone with Alzheimer's, who understands, who can validate, who can show up, who can empathize, and who can just be with you is very, very important.
Well, I really appreciate all the wisdom that you shared with us today. And I know from talking with so many people that we all need this kind of advice and guidance. So I'm thankful for you for being here today. And I will put information about your website and all the amazing webinars and classes that you offer in our show notes so that my listeners can find it for themselves if they need it.
All right. It was great being here. Thanks so much.
Who Gets the China is written and hosted by Kirsten Mao, produced by Aaron Bryce of Blue Ogden Productions. Our theme music is composed by Greg Fellman of Wind Sand Productions. Our cover art is by Jen Beam of Gigawatt Studio. For more stories and expert advice, follow along on Substack or at www.whogetsthechina.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone who might appreciate the conversation. And don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time.